jaundiced view of Indians, a result perhaps of his having taken the poisoned arrow in the groin during his first campaign against them. In fairness, though, it should be noted that Crook took a pretty jaundiced view of everybody. In particular, he had no use whatsoever for the drunken, bullying miners whose misconduct guaranteed trouble on the frontier. In later years, Crook looked back on his early campaigns in California and wrote,
"The country was overrun by people from all nations in search of the mighty dollar. Greed was almost unrestrained, and from the nature of our government, there was little or no law these people were bound to respect. It was no infrequent occurrence for an Indian to be shot down in cold blood, or a squaw to be raped by some brute. Such a thing as a white man being punished for outraging an Indian was unheard of. And the consequence was that there was scarcely ever a time there was not one or more wars with the Indians somewhere on the Pacific coast."
As a commander, Crook made a point of campaigning with Indians against Indians. He valued them as allies. This illustration shows Crow and Shoshone warriors riding with Crook against the Lakota. Crook was, above all else, a warrior with a warrior's code of ethics. He respected adversaries who fought in defense of their people and was respected in turn. Crook's autobiography is a surprising document. Here, for instance, is how America's foremost Indian fighter recalled his first posting in California.
"There were a good many Indians about Fort Jones, from whom I soon learned their grievances. It's hard to believe now the wrongs that these Indians had to suffer in those days. I doubt now if there's a single one left to tell their tale. The trouble with the Army was that the Indians would confide in us as friends, and we had to witness this unjust treatment of them without the power to help. Then, when they were pushed beyond endurance and would go on the warpath, we had to fight when our sympathies were with the Indians."
Nevada County never saw large-scale Indian fighting involving regular troops. The tidal wave of miners that broke over the Nishinon hit too hard and too fast for them to resist for long. In 1860, however, white Nevada County settlers were deeply involved in the Paiute War over on the east side of the Sierras. Nevada City was then the queen of the northern mines, the proud commercial hub of the Sierra. It was here that the first silver-rich ores from the Comstock were assayed. When the bonanza was confirmed, men and mining equipment from Nevada County poured over the Sierra and into Virginia City.
Henry Meredith was a handsome, cultured Virginian attorney who was the pride of the local chivalry and the head of our local militia, the Nevada Rifles. Meredith joined the rush from Nevada County to the Comstock, and he was there in the spring of 1860 when word arrived that a nearby Pony Express station had been attacked by Paiutes. Initial reports described the incident as a massacre of the defenseless station agents. Fear swept through the white population. As befitted a member of the chivalry, Henry Meredith immediately joined the volunteer force being formed under Major William Ormsby. Ironically, Ormsby was a close friend of the Paiute chieftain, Winnemucca, and Winnemucca's daughter, Sarah, sometimes lived in the Ormsby household. But swept up in the moment, Ormsby set out in pursuit of the Paiutes. He followed them up the Truckee River and straight into an ambush near Pyramid Lake. Ormsby's forces were destroyed. Only the coming of night saved the remnants from annihilation. Henry Meredith was badly wounded in the initial fighting and gallantly turned down a rescue attempt by his friends, telling them to save themselves instead. Meredith's body was recovered later and returned to Nevada City, where it was buried with much public mourning and ceremony.
This is Numaga, the war chief of the Paiutes who destroyed Ormsby's command. Ironically, Numaga had passionately urged his people not to undertake a war that they could not win. News of Ormsby's defeat sent shockwaves through the West. Militiamen and troops assembled all over Northern California. Jack Hayes, a veteran Texas Ranger, led out this second force against the Paiutes. The ensuing battle, also held at Pyramid Lake, was either a victory for the whites or an inconclusive draw, depending on whose account you read. Whatever the true result was, the battle's effect was to push the Paiute people back into the mountains, where winter hunger threatened to settle the dispute. Talks between the warring parties led to an uneasy truce that left the Paiutes in charge of the land around Pyramid Lake, which they retain to this day. But the white settlers and miners remained firmly in charge of much of the former Paiute homeland.
Years after the fighting, Sarah Winnemucca wrote a book that looked back on the affair from the Paiute point of view. From Sarah, we learned that the attack on the Pony Express station had not been an act of wanton barbarism, that the men at the station had, in fact, kidnapped two 12-year-old Paiute girls and were holding them captive in a secret basement room. A Paiute man overheard their cries and informed the tribe, and the men sent to investigate killed the Pony Express men after seeing the condition of the children. We've told this story of the Paiute War because it expresses so well the forces in play throughout the West at this time. From a distance, you could say that it was a war over resources. The Paiutes wanted to keep the land that had sustained their people for uncounted generations. The white settlers wanted timber for their mines and water for their crops.
But on a personal level, history is never so clear or tidy. Henry Meredith, for instance, it turns out, went to war and sacrificed his life to avenge the death of a gang of child rapists. William Ormsby led his militia to their deaths because he did not stop to ask the right questions. Ormsby was an ambitious man, active in local politics, and he may not have wanted to hear the answers. He may have been swayed by the thought that an easy victory over the Paiutes would look good on his election year resume. Umaga tried desperately to head his people off from a war they could not win, but his efforts came to nothing when the station men were killed. Instead of playing the peacemaker, he was forced into the role of military leader. It was he who laid the trap that destroyed Ormsby's ill-fated expedition.
Sarah Winnemucca's attempt to live in two cultures turned to tragedy as friends and family on both sides were destroyed in the violence. She described Ormsby as a dear friend and related how her brother Natchez even tried to save Ormsby's life on the battlefield. Sarah's grandfather, Chief Truckee, had sent his favorite granddaughter to live among the whites and learn their language. He strove mightily to avoid conflict, but his death in 1859 and the discovery of the Comstock lode unraveled the fragile peace. Sarah's voice in her writing is strong and moving. Her record spans crucial years of Paiute history, from the first contact with whites through her tribe's wretched confinement on reservations run by corrupt Indian agents. It's a story repeated many times throughout the West, and we are fortunate to have such an insightful eyewitness account by a survivor. In spite of everything, there were pockets of Indian culture that survived the onslaught, where Indian heritage was passed down over the generations. And Shelley Covert will take over now to tell the story of how her people survived at the epicenter of the gold rush.